Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have a early impression video on a brand new fragrance from the house of Aton Perfumes, and I've reviewed a couple from this house on the channel. Obviously, this gentleman's kind of claim to fame, if you will, is that he is the younger stepbrother of the great Russian Atom, and with that comes, I think, some advantages and responsibility because people expect a lot from you. And needless to say, I was very hard on his first couple creations, let's say. And I always thought he could do better. And this is him proving me right. And this is, I think, I'll just tell you right out of the gate, this is his best creation. Hands down, no question. It's not even close. This is his best creation. And it's a new fragrance that's going to be released in a couple days. Very rarely do I get to do these new, just released fragrances. And usually when I do, it's an artisanal house like this, you know. It's not like I'm getting to talk about the new Dior first or the new Guerlain or anything like that. A lot of times those just come to me periodically and I just review them whenever I review them. But I've been getting to talk a lot about these artisanal houses, and luckily that's kind of been where my nose has been taking me anyway. So this one's called Murasakino, which I love the name. We'll talk a little bit about it. Murasakino. Murasakino is the name of this fragrance, a 2024 release, actually his second release of the year. And I have a blurb, which he actually just sent to me, and I wore it to bed last night, and I'm wearing it as my scent of the day today for the very first time. So you can see, first of all, you can see the color of the juice, which is very dark, which is how I like my juice color. I always get suspect when I see a light juice color nowadays. Which is not fair because I just, you know, have a preference for darker juice colors now, but that is a beautiful color juice. And I'm wearing it as my scent of the day. I've got about a six and a half hour dry down here, and I just did a fresh spray. So, oh yes. So, okay, let's talk about what this fragrance is. So let me read you the blurb, and then we'll just go into sort of a early impression mode, if you will, because remember, I just have limited experience with this, but this is basically considered an animalic floral chypre. They call it an animalic dark floral chypre that is inspired by the mostly dark, challenging, or here's what they say. They say that Murasakino is the most dark, challenging, and animalic fragrance created by Aton Perfumes so far. Inspired by the violet florals of raw, wild, natural animalics, civet, and ouds of the Cambodian variety, inspiration came from the unusual contrasting elements of these materials. Repulsive, yet magnetic. I do not agree with the repulsive part. Wild, yet calming. Dirty, yet beautiful. Chaotic, yet balanced. This perfume presents us perfectly balanced contrasts of creamy violet florals with sensual animalics. I agree with all of that. It opens with a thick floral bouquet of dark blue chamomile, thick being the highlighted, underlined word. Thick floral. Blue chamomile, creamy ylang ylang, which here you get just a little bit of that kind of banana-like quality. Ylang ylang can sometimes give this like stringy custard banana quality, and you get some of that here in piercing neroli. Perfect explanation of the neroli as well, because the neroli really does pierce through this whole kind of very dark floral sort of composition that they've made up. So just imagine you're sort of in this, you know, foxhole, if you will, and I'll expound upon this kind of foxhole idea, but imagine you're like up against sandbags, maybe you're in a war or something, and all of a sudden this bullet pierces the sandbag and this ray of light just comes through. Everything else is kind of shadowed out. Maybe you have a helmet on or something and it's kind of blocking your vision a little bit, and all of a sudden something pierces right through the sandbag, and that pierce of light is kind of what the neroli feels like in here. Those floral notes are perfectly placed against civet and oud. Ylang ylang's delicious creaminess, highlighting creamy nuances of civet. Violet and herbaceous chamomile and lavender perfectly complement the mysterious Cambodian oud. Piercing neroli go along with musky blackcurrant. The animalistic nature of this scent wakes up in the heart, dominating the fragrance and delivering a highly sensual experience. Oh, it's beautiful. Long-lasting base is akin to black, bubbling resin on charcoal, full of musky nuances and creamy gourmand violet facets. extremely complex and well-balanced. This is the most sophisticated and challenging perfume we have created to date. That is the blurb, which actually is a hell of a blurb. Very well written, and I would say true. You know, some blurbs are like out in left field. This one is 100% spot on true. So here's the note listing according to what he sent me so far. We've got, sorry, this is bothering me. I can see it on camera. Fuck you, string. We've got neroli, ylang ylang, jasmine, and chamomile in the top, with a heart of Cambodian oud, tobacco absolute, civet absolute, and peach, with a base of lavender absolute, saffron, black currant, and birch tar. Now, I think there's some other things in here which are not listed, but that's a good kind of, I think, starting note breakdown. So here's the thing. If you've been following my channel, I think that my take on Anton as a creator, because that's his name, the gentleman's name is Anton, and he's a young creator, if you're not familiar. I think he's in his 20s still. I think he's in his mid to late 20s, actually, if I had to guess. I can't remember exactly how old he is, but I don't think he's very old. And so I think he is almost like someone who had a huge advantage of kind of coming up, because he had Russian Adam to kind of take him under his wing and guide him. And he has the ability to get his hands on some of what I would consider the most rare and precious and raw materials and ingredients you can imagine. Russian Adam is known for working with some of the rarest ingredients on earth. He just released his Oud Taiwan, which I did like an early impression on. You should see the dent I've put in my decant, my travel atomizer that Russian Adam sent me. I've been really, really loving wearing Oud Taiwan. And so I've never even heard of oud from Taiwan until Russian Adam kind of brought it to us, right? So these rare ingredients is something that Adam, and I think by sort of extension then Aton Anton can get his hands on. Any mortal human would be very lucky to work with these, especially if you're trying to create a perfume. On the other side, as I said, it has great responsibility, right? It's like great power, but great responsibility. And if you watched some of my previous reviews for him, I reviewed things like Roxbury, which Roxbury used this very amazing aged patchouli. I think it was like aged 24 years and like a camel leather thing. And, you know, it was so different from most of the regular patchouli that you smell. And when you smell Roxbury, that is clearly the star of the show, and does a lot of the heavy lifting. And then I reviewed Animalia, which is a release that came out early on in 2024. So it's now end of July 2024. Animalia came out, I want to say like January, February of 2024 from memory. And which I was very harsh on. I didn't care as much for Animalia. But this one feels like he's finally taking the next step. So for me, this is him finally kind of maturing and really coming into his own. This is his coming out party, would be the way I would describe it. And, you know, if you've watched some of my previous content, and I know there's a lot out there to go through, but I interviewed Sultan Pasha. Some of the content that I'm most personally proud of is some of my interview work. And Sultan Pasha, during his interview with me, he described his creative process as akin to almost like having an itch that you have to scratch and you have to like get it out of you. Like you have to relieve this itch. Like you ever had a mosquito bite and then you itched it once and then you just itched it like 2 or 3 times, and now because you've started to itch it, all you want to do is itch it. But if you don't touch it, you're okay. That's kind of how this creative process, I think, that Sultan Pasha was describing to me, for him. And you know what? This is one of those fragrances that feels like, it felt like Anton really had something important to say and he put it in a perfume. You know, it feels like he had something amazing to convey to the audience. And I really think this is him taking the next step. That's the way that I view Murasakino. Hell of a name, by the way. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. But this is, I would say, the first Aton Perfumes fragrance that I could wholeheartedly recommend. Like, if you have tastes like mine, this is a safe blind buy. Now, for the average Joe out there, it's actually exactly the opposite, because this is the exact opposite of a safe blind buy for somebody who wears freshies or, you know, something like that. If Dior Higher is your signature scent, this is not for you. Or at least it's not a safe blind buy, I would say. But this opens up basically with this very thick floral accord. And I said highlight and underline and put exclamation marks next to thick, because it is a thick floral accord, okay? It's very alluring. It smells like something that is attractive and dangerous at the same time, if that makes sense. Like a witch's brew of floral concoctions where you kind of know it's dangerous, but you just can't help keep smelling it, or can't help kind of tasting water from the well, if you will. So the best way to describe the fragrance is by textures. The texture of this fragrance in the first hour is thick, layered, and almost like stacked on top of each other. So if you can imagine this like wavy texture of the florals, like maybe flowers kind of blowing in the wind, but just right on top of each other. And the flowers are interlacing with each other, and one flower gets twisted with another, and they kind of, you know, the vines and twigs kind of start growing into each other, and they kind of crisscross, and all of a sudden you have this like vinery of flowers, right? That's how I would describe the texture of the florals here. They seem stacked on top of each other for the first 5 to 10 minutes. So much so that the fragrance almost gives this very dark edge to it. Like I mentioned when I first was reading the blurb, this feeling of being in like a foxhole, okay? This fragrance feels like you're almost in a foxhole where sandbags are like stacked on top of each other. And if you just have a few sandbags, it's no big deal, right? Because we're tall and the sandbags are down there. But if you're on your back in a foxhole and all of a sudden you have all of these sandbags stacked up, it starts to block more and more light. And pretty soon you're in this literal almost enclosure, right? You're in this foxhole surrounded by sandbags. And that's how the florals feel in the opening. It feels like they're stacked so high that it's almost like they block out the sun, all right? And then there comes this piercing ray of light. And it's almost as if your eyes are trying to adjust to the dark. And once they finally get adjusted to the dark, someone just turns a flashlight on in your face. And the flashlight right in your eyes kind of blinds you a little bit. The flashlight is this combination of the florals. He mentions the neroli, and I think the neroli adds a little bit of this kind of freshness to a otherwise very, very dark composition. That's why I said, just imagine like one little bullet hole through the sandbag and that ray of light kind of coming through. Or if you've ever seen like a broken window where like a small rock kind of pierced this otherwise beautiful stained glass window or something, and everything's blocked out except for that one little hole of light is very prominent, right? That's kind of how this fragrance wears. But the piercing light here feels like it's a combination of the animalics and the florals, if you will, which, to be fair, and you know, I think a lot of people could have maybe just put their heads down and like walked away. I mean, to his credit, you know, he has not gotten the reception that Russian Atom has gotten, obviously. The acclaim. I gave him a pretty hard time on some of his other creations. And I think it would have been easy for a young guy to just go, well, I'm not Russian Atom, you know, and I'm just going to go do something else. But to his credit, he put his head down, he continued to work, he continued to release new fragrances, and I really like what he's doing. I like the fact that he continued to stay with it, because some people need to just grow into their own skin, and everyone kind of grows and matures at a different pace. And so some of the things that I actually gave him a hard time on, if you go back and watch my old Aton Perfumes, which this is how his brand is kind of written. That's his logo right there, and the decants or Discovery atomizers come in these little pouches. But I didn't like the original samples. They came in these long kind of atomizers, which didn't spray very well. They just kind of dribbled juice on your hands. And I mentioned that in some of the videos. And he corrected it with this one. This is a very similar atomizer to what I think Russian Atom uses in his. And this actually has a good sprayer on it. It still seals up tight. And so you don't get that dribble of juice when and sometimes the other one would just leak out the side. And this is far superior, number one. Number two, I didn't like the way he used animalics in Animalia. I mean, if you're going to have a fragrance called Animalia, you assume it was going to be this big punch to the face animalic fragrance, but it wasn't. And here, I feel like he maybe got a little bit out of his comfort zone, but he created something amazing by doing so. You know, this is him going into the deep end of the pool for the first time, and it is awesome. It is very, very impressive. So, my understanding of the word Murasakino is that it actually comes from the Japanese word Murasaki, which means purple. For all my Japanese listeners out there, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Murasaki basically means purple. And so Murasakino is kind of like a makeup of the word Murasaki. And what I really like about Murasakino as a name is that the first thing I thought about when I saw the name, very first thing that I thought about was Mitsouko. First thing. And I know that the two have absolutely nothing in common, but my Americanized brain went Mitsouko with this. And then once I learned that it meant purple, it borrows and kind of twists meaning from a couple different areas, and it all makes sense because there is something purple in this, and I think it's probably the blend of the florals mixed with this lavender absolute, which I think he mentioned was in the heart or the base, but it comes off pretty prominent on my skin in the opening. And if you've watched some of my videos on the House of Sherwood, which is another up-and-coming artisanal house, which, again, actually used Russian Atom as a influence. I mean, I know Prakar Gupta, who I interviewed on the channel, he basically flat out said Russian Atom was like my inspiration. He's the person who inspired me to do these fragrances. But it starts off reminding me of some of the Sherwood fragrances that I reviewed on the channel. And it starts out being blended. It's almost like this purple smell feels like the florals and the animalics and everything is like whipped into a frenzy. You know what I mean? Like a tornado style kind of just swirl of notes. And it's whipped into a frenzy with these animalic notes that start to smell, especially in the first 5 or 10 minutes. When you first try to start breaking this fragrance down, again, I've only worn it twice. I wore it yesterday to bed and I wore it now, wearing it as my scent of the day. But it smells slightly sweaty, slightly dirty. Actually, there are points in time where you think it will smell a lot sweaty. You know, if you like the way that Jean-Claude Elena used to use some of that cumin-y, sweaty feeling, even though there's no cumin in here, at least none listed, I wouldn't be surprised if there is a hint of some sort of cumin or spice or something giving it this, you know, or the civet is just coming across as this kind of sweaty, creamy smelling civet. All right, but the way it's all blended here is beautiful because it's dirty. Depending on where you are in your journey, I think is going to depend on how dirty you think this fragrance smells to you. Like if you're brand new, and as I said, you love to wear freshies all day, you may smell this and just be like, oh my God, how in the world could any human like this? But if you're an old timer and you've smelled a lot of things, you've smelled a lot of different fragrances from different time periods and different types of compositions, and you've smelled real oud and all that, then this may not smell as animalic to you as it will to others. But I definitely feel like compared to the dry down, which is still, I'm impressed by the way it all holds together into the dry down. But the opening is really where I think that combo of what smells like some sort of sweaty, pissy, urinous side of the civet, maybe mixed with some cumin, works together with the florals. And here it's almost like the oud and civet were just made for each other. It also seems like the oud and the saffron and the dry down were made for each other, but we'll get to that later. But here, the oud brilliantly, I think, adds just enough earthiness and just enough woodiness to pull this fragrance into this true artisanal territory. You know, because a lot of people, when you're going to spend, which, by the way, I forgot to write down the price, but I think he said it was $230 for 30 mil, around there, $230, $240. But it's coming out in a couple days. You'll be able to see it on his website, which is AtonPerfumes.com, by the way, AtonPerfumes.com. So when you're paying $230, let's say, for 30 mil, which is not bad considering what some of the artisanal houses are spending nowadays. You used to get 50 mils. Like his old fragrances were, I think, 50 mils. Patchouli Lave, Roxbury, and the Bright Lights, I think, were all 50 mil bottles for $190, give or take. Or maybe Roxbury was a little more expensive because of the older patchouli that was used in there. But when you're spending that kind of money, either way, $230 for 30 mils is not... I would buy this. Absolutely. This is a full bottle for me. I would absolutely buy this if I could buy fragrances right now. But you want to get this real material feel, you know what I mean? Like you want to get the real oud, you want to get the real civet, and you want to get what smells like the real florals, not some actual perfumer's interpretation of what jasmine smells like. You want the real jasmine Ato, or, you know, I know that's very expensive, most people don't use that, or jasmine essential oil, but you want to get, let's say, high-end jasmine absolute at least, or something like that, right? And here you get just enough of that to make you feel like you're getting a proper artisanal fragrance, but it's kind of weighted with this proper blending and proper mixing, which has been, I've been very impressed by this, very impressed. And the civet adds just enough kind of pissy, sweaty funkiness to counterbalance that huge kind of weight of the florals in the opening. Because the florals in the opening, I mentioned them kind of like being stacked on top of each other earlier. And when they give you that feel, that stack on top of each other, like think of the sand in the sandbags, right? If you just have a couple grains of sand in your hand, it's not heavy, right? When you start stacking sandbags together, it can get very, very heavy, very, very quick, right? And that's how the florals feel in here. They feel weighted, like there's real heft to them, even though one floral petal may be light enough for you to just blow the petals up in the air with your breath. But holding a lot of them together can feel heavy, 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 right? And that's the way that the fragrance kind of feels and wears. Now, the play on the Japanese name for purple and then the Mitsouko play on the Chypre could not have been better chosen. I think it might even be one of my favorite names I've stumbled across if he was actually meaning to kind of make you think a little bit of Mitsouko, you know, because it references the past and it sort of looks to the future in a way. And so the purple color in this fragrance is actually important, and I don't know if it's the Lavender Absolute. The way sometimes Lavender Absolute can make people think of the color purple. Sometimes it just is. Even though Lavender Absolute is green in its color, it can make you think of the color purple when you wear it. And here, this reminds me of this very purpley smelling floral take on lavender, very similar to the way that the lavender is used in some of the Sherwood fragrances like I mentioned earlier. It could also be just this very unique combination of florals, which is giving me this purple-like feel. If you've been watching some of my old reviews, I've reviewed some things like Grossmith's, which is a hell of a niche house, by the way. I would highly urge any hardcore vintage lover, if you want to check out a niche house, check out the house of Grossmith. Especially if you like things like vintage Guerlain and stuff like that, those will be right up your alley. And I'm not saying that this smells exactly like vintage Guerlain or vintage Grossmith or anything like that, but, you know, these creations sort of will sometimes give off this purpley, flowery type hue. And this reminds me a little bit of that. But imagine if you can think of it in the range of artisanal perfumery, all right? So the fragrance dries as the hours tick by. The fragrance doesn't have like a silk. Some florals give off like silky feels or, you know, stuff like that, velvety feels. This can almost come across as suffocating just because of the way, that weight that I was mentioning earlier. And I could totally see someone that doesn't like animalic floral fragrance or animalic Chypre fragrances shun this, okay? Because the florals, and I noticed it actually a lot more when I went outside because it's going to be close to 100 degrees here in Texas today. It's July 30th. It's July 30th, 2024, and it is hot in Texas, and that's just the way it is. But I went outside, and that's when I really noticed that the florals felt even more funky, even more weighty, even more heavy. And in the air conditioning, it doesn't seem as bad. You know, sitting in the house with the house on 70 degrees or whatever I have it on, you know, it feels like you're comfortable. I can really tell that the fragrance has depth and weight to it. But it didn't feel as suffocating. You go out in the heat with this, I could totally see that. I could totally see that being a little off-putting to some, okay? Because the florals in here feel like you're like trapped inside of this thorny vine, like this thorny viney enclosure, you know? And you're trying to chop your way out of these vines, and every time you chop one vine with your machete, another two vines kind of close around you. There's this feeling of just being gripped, you know, with this fragrance. This fragrance has this feeling of being like bear hugged by somebody much stronger than you. And I actually like the strength and depth of this fragrance. If you love vintage perfumery, I think this is one you should definitely check out because this fragrance has character. You know, this fragrance has strength. But the purple side of the way that the florals start to kind of smell adds also this luxury bit. So when I smelled it yesterday, I tried to smell it without reading the note listing that Anton sent to me, okay? And when I smelled it at first, I wrote in my notes there is probably some sort of iris note that's going to pop up in here. There is no iris, at least not listed in the note listing. There's no iris or orris root or anything like that. But I think the reason this gives off this purple iris smell is the combination of the florals and probably this earthy oud. Iris can sometimes come across as smelling earthy and chalky and stuff like that. Papery. This one, I I think it's a combination of the way the florals and the oud adds this very earthy element to it because it's Cambodian oud, and it actually blends beautifully with the tobacco. I noticed that in many of his fragrances, he uses some sort of tobacco, but it doesn't always smell like you would expect a tobacco absolute to smell. And I know that he actually, one of his first fragrances with Russian Atom, actually maybe the only one they've actually collaborated on officially, was Manly, and that was supposed to be a take on tobacco. That's probably the most proper tobacco fragrance that he's created. But I will tell you that for those of you who are kind of worried about the animalic side of Murasakino, I think that this fragrance kind of has one foot in the past with this reference to Mitsouko and one foot in modern artisanal perfumery. So just like I mentioned, it's got one foot in the past and one foot in the present, it kind of has one foot in the animalics territory where it'll shock you a little bit in the opening, but very quickly it can pull back. And those animalic notes that felt so heavy and suffocating and thick, all of a sudden take their knee off of your throat a little bit. And you kind of start seeing that this fragrance can be much more wearable, I think, than most people realize. Especially in the dry down. This 6-7 hour dry down, I would have no problem wearing this, even to the office if you're cognizant of what you wear to the office and stuff like that. I think the way that this dries and the opening can be just blatantly shocking, and then 20, 30, 45 minutes later, even though it's still considered an animalic floral, animalic chypre, I think it would become very wearable. And part of it, I think, is because he's added some fruity notes in here. Part of it is because this floral chypre style DNA, I think, is known to some people. But it's interesting because he used peach, which peach is actually used in Mitsouko. And I think that's maybe what also gave me the, maybe there is a reason for the name reference of Murasakino. And, but what's interesting is there's no, you're not going to find like oak moss, vetiver, tonka, vanilla, labdanum, you know, the usual base notes of a chypre. You won't find that in Murasakino, okay? The oud acts as a base to me. The oud mixed with saffron and other things basically gives it this very artisanal mossy feel. It's like a replacement for the moss that you would expect in something like Mitsouko, okay? But it definitely has this boiling, bubbly, cauldron-like feel that you would expect from labdanum, but done with the oud, okay? Done in like this earthy, woody type base. And I think if you're worried by the oud, many people hear oud or they hear civet and they're like, I'm not touching that. That bear hug into the dry down. So I mentioned the opening definitely will be challenging for some people. I love it. From the very first time I smelled it, I love this. But that dry down, what ends up happening as the hours kind of tick by is that bear hug I was mentioning earlier starts to turn into like a cuddly hug, you know? The strength begins to let go. You're still being held, but it becomes not necessarily playful, but there's little bits and pieces here that just make it less serious. I mentioned the peach a little bit. There's also blackcurrant into the dry down. There's a touch of smokiness, and that works brilliantly as a base because you know, sometimes you'll see like these old school chypres and you'll see a million notes and you'll see like frankincense in the base. And the frankincense, I think, is really meant to work with the mosses and all that stuff to kind of build that proper chypre base. But here, they've used the oud, which can also come across as slightly smoky, but also birch tar. And the birch tar adds that papery, sort of brittle, sort of smokiness that can come through, right? Wisps of smoke. And so what I really like is how it uses all of these high-end artisanal kind of ingredients, and they allow you to get to really smell and appreciate the materials, you know, but it's not just one note doing the heavy lifting like Roxbury. That's why I really feel like this is him taking the next step. And it really feels like you can enjoy all these high-end materials, but also in the entire composition. Right? It's not just smelling the patchouli, because Russian Atom sent me, let's say, that patchouli that was aged for 24 years. I have the actual ingredient. It's beautiful. I mean, I like smelling that just as much as I like smelling Roxbury. Here, it feels like you're really enjoying an entire composition for the very first time. For me, for my 2 cents. you're really experiencing the entire array of the composition from start to finish, from opening to dry down. And it feels like all the pieces of the puzzle fit. So into the dry down, I think there's two genius notes that he kind of used in the base. One is saffron, the other is blackcurrant. All right, and saffron adds a bit of this Middle Eastern touch. It works brilliantly with the oud, of course, but it gives a little bit of that syrupy, bubbly, cauldron, dark, woody thing that the oud has going on. And saffron and oud are like perfect marriage mates. They work beautifully with each other. It comes across as just a little bit chemically, but I get a lot of saffron into the dry down. So just like I got way more lavender absolute in the opening to heart than I would have expected, I got more saffron in the dry down than I would have expected. The saffron is pretty prominent on my skin. And so what ends up happening is that this fruity accord, which in the mid is basically that peach, okay? Well, the peach is never very prominent on my skin. It almost kind of plays peekaboo here and there. It comes and it goes. And so what he did is, in the dry down, he added this blackcurrant note. And blackcurrant adds this very light, almost like fruity, light fruitiness, let's just call it, okay? Just this light fruitiness that kind of peeks in and out of the fragrance. But it brings continuity with it. So basically into the heart, you get that peach, which in the opening can smell slightly candied just because of how thick and everything else is. But it just kind of comes and goes. That peach note never really makes itself known. It never really takes a full stand, if you will. And in the dry down, the blackcurrant note just kind of picks it up and takes it to the finish line. And I really like how he sort of incorporated the blackcurrant note, adding that light fruitiness. One note that I failed to give some appreciation to is this violet leaf or violet leaf absolute. I forgot which one he used. But many times violet leaf can come off as ozonic, where you're like, you know, imagine like airy ozone, or imagine like the watery kind of inside of a cucumber or something like that. If you've ever seen kind of like an oil rig on fire, it almost looks like as soon as the air hits, as soon as the oil like hits the air, it's on fire, right? And here, the violet leaf almost feels like it is something similar, like it's ozonic, but it's on fire. You know, it has a little bit of that feel to it. Really, really enjoy this. Very complex. By far, I think his best creation, hands down. If you watch all my videos, like I said, I think I've said it even when I was pretty rough on his creations, that I think he has a bright future. And like I said, I think he's only still in his 20s. So I stand by what I say, especially if he can make this type of perfumery. This is where I think his future really lies. This is him kind of taking the torch, not from Russian Atom, but really picking up on, I think, the bits and pieces that so many people love about artisanal perfumery. And I think now he's finally he's playing in the big leagues with this. This is very, very impressive work. Very impressive. And that very suffocating quality of the florals as it dries begins to loosen a little bit. So it's like, you know, you're still in the shade, but it's still hot outside. That's kind of how a little bit of how it feels to me. So imagine maybe imagine being in darkness, but maybe it's like an eclipse. If you ever sat through an actual eclipse, it's light outside, but it's also dark because of the eclipse. You know, it's kind of a weird sensation. The tenacity and the heaviness of the florals starts to die down as the hours tick by, and it does give you a little bit of that weird kind of sensation, because it's not as suffocating as the opening. But I am very, very impressed with this. I would love to know if anyone else gets a chance to smell this. Do come back to this video. Please leave a comment. Let me know what you think. You know, if you're into the artisanal perfumery scene lately, Murasakino is a surprise. I like this way more than I thought I would. So again, this was actually sent to me by Anton, so thank you. Thank you for the little decant here. I always love getting to smell and explore and do new things and do videos for you guys. We have some very important milestones that we're coming up on very soon. One is 10,000 subscribers, which I'm very excited about. Another is 1,000 videos, which will be coming up very soon. And finally, on August the 10th, which is a Saturday, we've got Liz Moores from Aton Perfumery, or Papillon Artisanal Perfumes, I think she calls it, coming on at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. So I hope you guys can join live and kind of celebrate having someone like Liz on the channel come with some questions. So hope you guys get a chance to try Murasakino. And as always, thanks for watching. Cheers, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.